out there, and you've got some big panels.
We shall. Yes, Mike Morrell, Leon Panetta, H.R. McMaster talk about the hot spots around the world, and Chris Wallace is going to show up on Sunday and he's got a great list of guests as well. So we'll all be out there in Simi Valley, and as John just pointed out, all these issues we're talking about here at the G20, Ukraine and Russia and China and on, they all come together right now, almost in parallel lives a little bit over the weekend.
All right, well that ends it for us this week. We'll see you back here Monday morning. Thank you for joining us, and safe travels to you, Bill. We'll be watching over the weekend. Thank you. Outnumbered starts right now.
Fox News alert. We just heard from President Trump meeting with Japanese PM Abe. They will meet again later this hour along with the Prime Minister of India. This as the White House weighs in on the decision to cancel a formal meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin. This is Outnumbered, and I'm Melissa Francis. I feel better than I sound. Here today is Harris Faulkner, Fox News contributor Katie Pavlich, host of Kennedy on the Fox Business Network, Kennedy, and joining us on the couch today, Republican strategist and chairman of GOPAC, David Avella, and he is outnumbered. Thanks for joining us. So much to get to today.
Much to get into today. Looking forward to it.
We got everything going on in the G20, and then we have all the political wranglings back here. We're glad you're here.
Thank you.
Let's get to it. So as we await the president's second meeting with Prime Minister Abe, along with India's prime minister, the White House is denying reports from Russian media that President Trump and Russian President Putin will have a brief meeting at the G20. Yesterday, President Trump canceled a meeting with Putin over a growing confrontation between Russia and Ukraine. Today, the White House said there is, quote, no scheduled pull aside. And a short time ago, White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders saying, quote, the Russian witch hunt hoax, which is hopefully now nearing an end, is doing very well. Unfortunately, it probably does undermine our relationship with Russia. However, the reason for our canceled meeting is Ukraine. Hopefully that will be resolved soon so that the productive conversations can begin. This morning, the president and leaders of Canada and Mexico signed a new trade deal to replace NAFTA, the president touting the agreement as a win for American workers.
The USMCA is the largest, most significant, modern, and balanced trade agreement in history. All of our countries will benefit greatly. It is probably the largest trade deal ever made also. This is an amazing deal for our farmers and also allows them to use cutting-edge biotechnology and eliminates non-scientific barriers.
The president will also be sitting down with Chinese President Xi Jinping on Saturday amid growing trade tensions and questions over whether the U.S. and China can agree on tariffs and technology. Let me start there with that piece and that big meeting coming up with China, because with all the distractions that are going on here in the U.S., I can tell you for sure that is what the market and investors care about. The president has put forth this model where, in spite of all the criticism, he has made a deal with Mexico and with Canada and teed up to meet with China now. Do you think something gets done?
The most important meetings happening at this G20 summit meetings are the ones that have just occurred, which is the president meeting with the prime minister from Japan and the one he's about to have with the leader of India, because it sends a clear message to China. We are going after your neighbors to the east. We're going after your neighbors to the south. We are going to get deals with them. And let's keep in mind the two things that President Xi wants. He wants China to remain communist, and he wants to stay the leader. And in order to do that, he needs a deal with America. But it has to be done in a way that everybody comes out looking like a winner. And that's the key for the president. Can a deal be put together that allows the president of China to save face, look like he has gotten something for his country, but at the same time giving America what they want?
People have criticized the president, Kennedy, saying he loves tariffs. This is hurting America. What he's done, for sure, is applied pressure. And you look at the data out today, Chinese manufacturing activity at its slowest level in 28 months. This is having a big impact on China. It's hurting them. Does it put more pressure on their leaders to come to the table?
It absolutely does, because they need a short-term win. And they have two strategies here, because obviously President Xi wants to remain, and he has anointed himself president for life. They've got the long-term, multi-decade strategy. And I think that's where the intellectual property theft comes in, because they essentially steal great American ideas and bolster Chinese technology and essentially manufacturing. And that's the long-term goal. That's what we should be shutting shutting down. And that's where the president should stand as firmly as possible so they're not stealing our great ideas for their long-term gain. Now, in the short term, as far as these tariffs, it is really going to hurt them. And you're absolutely right. They're going to have to craft a deal that boosts both economies and the world economy along with it, so we can have freer trade back and forth between both countries. Free trade means you don't steal other people's great ideas.
Yeah,
Yep.
absolutely. Well, and the president is in now, David, which I think you were alluding to, a unique position of leverage and power after having signed the USMCA today. And, you know, Democrats have criticized, well, he took, you know, pieces of that and put that into the agreement from NAFTA. It's not all that different. Well, then I would ask why they wouldn't automatically sign it when it gets to Congress and not make any textual changes. That aside, when you get ready to talk with China, and you mentioned the neighbors situation, you can say, well, you know, look at what I did in North America. Like, I'm willing to do what I need to do to get the best deal for the United States.
That's exactly right. And as you look at many of these summits, and while the media wants to focus on every camera angle that maybe shows a foreign leader not liking President Trump, the reality is he more often than not exceeds expectations at these summits. And you were talking about the Mexico and Canada deal today. There is another significant deal that has happened during this administration that is not talked about as we talk about Russia. And that is that we got Europe using more of our natural gas and less of Russia's natural gas. And so as we look at it from a trade perspective, this president has been very successful at getting deals done that help American workers.
And he's been very disciplined. I mean, that's what we've seen from the beginning, no matter how much pressure he gets from home, from people saying, you know, they target the group that supports him. People yell at him here in the U.S. He loves tariffs. He doesn't know what he's doing. He knows how to negotiate. I've said it from the beginning, and I never do this, but on business issues, it was clear he's negotiating with pressure. Yes?
He knows how to get all of the noise out and really focus in on what the task at hand is in a short period of time. He knows that the summit is important. Everybody's watching. When it comes to China, it's a very interesting situation for the Chinese president domestically on the ground, because China has been able to grow this middle class in China. And because things have been good economically for a huge, huge population of people, there haven't been many complaints about the censorship, the communism, the lack of property, the moving people in from the rural areas to the urban areas. But if that middle class no longer has economic stability and opportunity, which we're seeing, as you pointed out, Melissa, then the president of China has a problem on his hands with the middle class saying, well, what about these censorship? And what about these opportunities that you promised us as a government that are no longer coming? And that is a problem for him domestically if he can't get a deal with the president.
And you touch on something that's so important, and that's economic mobility. That's something that is built into our system. But that is essentially very new in places like China and India, and that's why it's so important. You're absolutely right, because it's those economic issues that resonate everywhere, but that is new to them. And if he starts to shut that down, you are right. That's that presidency for life.
He's the strongest president of China since Mao, and there's a reason why he's been tightening his grip inside the country domestically as the economy hasn't gone south, but has certainly slowed when it comes to building, manufacturing, and all these other things that have been affected by these tariffs from the U.S.
And it's why it's all tougher for President Xi. In America, windmills blow because the wind blows them. In China, they blow because the government tells them to blow. And he has to manage an economy where unless he says it happens, it doesn't happen. And everything has to be right for him in order for that economy to keep going. That's why he has to have a trade deal.
So speaking of putting pressure on people, the person he's not meeting with, and we heard this at the beginning, is Vladimir Putin. Here's what he had to say a short time ago about who exactly canceled that meeting.
We don't like what happened. We're not happy about it. Nobody is. And hopefully they'll be able to settle it out soon, because we look forward to meeting with President Putin. But on the basis of what took place with respect to the ships and the sailors, that was the sole reason.
So I think as a nation, this is a bit of transparency that's actually been good for us to see. You know, I took an elevator ride with a couple of our colleagues yesterday, Kennedy from your network, and the question was, well, do you think they're going back and forth and this is bad? And I'm like, no. this is actually really good for the American people to see, because there's been so much doubt about whether or not this president would do what was necessary with regard to Russia. And it's not vacillation that's been going on. It literally is like a negotiation that happens in clear plain sight. We get to hear what Russia's, they threw a little bit of shade yesterday, by the way, Russia. When they put out their statement, they said, well, we haven't exactly heard officially from the president in the White House, but, you know, that gives us a useful time for some meetings and blah, 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 blah,
we
blah.
assume it's a reaction to domestic politics.
Right,
it really has nothing to do with us being big fat bullies and threatening to invade Ukraine.
Right. And so now we see the president doing what, and he said this was his decision. And we all remarked, wait, did he say it was his decision? Well, whose else would it be? And you had some thoughts.
Yeah. Well, certainly the Security Council that he has of Secretary Pompeo and this Chief of Staff Kelly and Bolton have all been very strong about their wanting a strong stance against Russia. But and you mentioned a little bit of shade of the domestic side. Look at the actual policies towards Russia. Sanctions have been put on place. We've gotten the European countries doing more trade with us than taking away from Russia. On a policy perspective, we have been far tougher on Russia in this administration than we have in previous administrations.
So you weren't surprised to see Russia maybe throw a little bit of...
What's Russia best at, and what have they been best at for decades, going back to President Reagan, which is to be agitators in the U.S. system. And what can they do to cause problems and divisions in the U.S.?
I know your voice is going, but I have to pick your brain on something. So if they do meet on the sideline, for instance, what gets, because you've covered these things on FBN, what gets done really?
If they meet on the sidelines with Russia?
Yeah.
Boy, that's a tough one, because if it were truly about business, you kind of get down to what is it that I really need? Why aren't we able to meet? Where are we? And those sideline meetings can be so much more effective because they're more to the point. With Russia, it is really tough to know, because you don't know where these two are, and it isn't just about money. It's about the power between them. So
we'll be covering every second here on Fox.
Absolutely. All right, quick note to our viewers: this Saturday from the Reagan Library, Bill Hemmer, Brett Baer, Jennifer Griffin, and other Fox News anchors and correspondents, they're all going to be moderating some terrific panels during the Reagan Defense Forum. It will stream live on Fox Nation, and parts will air on the Fox News channel. Chris Wallace will anchor Fox News Sunday live from the Reagan Library as well. Check your local listings for times on the Fox Broadcast Network, or catch it all here at 2 p.m. and 7 p.m. Eastern. All right, former President Obama weighing in on the partisan division in our country, appearing to lay some of the blame on the media. We'll debate. Plus, President Trump and his team are fighting back amid a flurry of activity in the Mueller probe. The latest revelations and whether they put the president at the forefront of the investigation.
Fallout over the latest developments in the Mueller investigation. President Trump's personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani, is accusing the special counsel of deliberately timing new court filings to coincide with the president's departure yesterday for the G20. Shortly before the Air Force One took off for Buenos Aires, the president's former personal attorney, Michael Cohen, pleaded guilty to lying to Congress about talks during the 2016 campaign to build a Trump Tower in Moscow. That deal never happened. The Washington Post, citing the new court filings as evidence the president has become a central figure in the investigation. Meanwhile, Yahoo News is reporting Mueller is also looking into Ivanka Trump and Don Jr. and their work on the scrapped Moscow project. This is BuzzFeed is reporting the Trump organization planned to give Vladimir Putin a $50 million penthouse apartment in that said building. Trump's attorney, Rudy Giuliani, called the report, quote, crazy. The president pushing back on all of this, tweeting this morning, "Oh, I get it. I am a very good developer, happily living my life. When I see our country going in the wrong direction," parenthetically, he says, to put it mildly, "against all odds, I decide to run for president and continue to run my business, very legal and very cool." Talked about it on the campaign trail, lightly looked at doing a building somewhere in Russia, put up zero money, zero guarantees, and didn't do the project. Witch hunt! Exclamation point. The likely incoming chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, Democrat Jerry Nadler, says there's still a lot we don't know about what Mueller has found.
It's also clear that Mueller knows a lot that we don't know, and that Cohen's testimony is far more relevant than just his involvement with payoffs to Stormy Daniels, but gets into a lot of other things that Trump was doing, such as the business dealings with the Russians.
Yeah, I think my brain just broke. So there's a lot that we don't know, but we're going to go ahead and say what we do know based on stuff that really doesn't even have evidence yet because we haven't seen it.
One thing we know is Michael Cohen is why bad lawyer jokes were created. Think about your worst one, and he personifies it. That said, Mueller can make somebody's day bad, but nothing yet to date has suggested it would be the president's. Everything has been about business deals. Everything has been about everything except what this investigation started on, was did Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump get in a room together and say, hey, here's how we're going to make sure Hillary Clinton doesn't get elected president. Now, if we're going to start getting into business deals, if that's what this new Congress wants to focus on is business deals, then let's start with Nancy Pelosi, and every time she votes on grapes, does her vineyard get a benefit from that? And the two wealthiest U.S. senators in the U.S. Senate are Richard Blumenthal and Dianne Feinstein, both of whom got wealthier while they served in Congress. So if we're going to start investigating people's business deals, let's do everybody in Congress.
Yep. I like that idea.
All right.
Yeah.
I want to just hit where some of the president's critics are hitting him right now, Kennedy, and pick your brain on it. So when those critics say, well, the president isn't telling the truth because he said that he wasn't doing deals with Russia, and now he's talking about it as if he had talked about it contemporaneously, what do you say?
I think all of those things can be true at the same time. And the president is...
Would that make the president not telling the truth be not telling the truth now?
I don't know, man. I think that some of this is fluid for him. And I think, you know, his memory sort of changes with time. And that's one of the reasons his lawyers didn't want him sitting down with special counsel. But in his defense, and I really believe this, he thought he wasn't going to win. And he needed other stuff to do after November 8th, 2016, and was continuing along with the real estate development business and the other aspects of the family business. And I think we were all shocked when he actually won that night. And I think him most of all. So the question is, how far back do you go punishing someone? Is it when they first think about dabbling in politics? Is that high school, college, law school? Is it 5 years ago? You know, what is the timeline? Is it when he became the nominee? When is it more legally problematic for him? And notice that Michael Cohen, in his guilty plea, he told Congress, he lied to them about the Moscow building development. And when he was asked why he lied, he said that he was staying consistent with the president's political messaging. He didn't say because the president told me to.
Right.
That would be problematic.
Yeah, my question here is, what is the implication? So even if Donald Trump had, or his organization, not him directly, had offered Vladimir Putin to have the penthouse in Trump Tower, when you do business in Russia, if you are going to do business, you have to go through Vladimir Putin. There is no other way in that country to do business. Is the implication that if they gave Putin this penthouse, that he somehow would support Donald Trump for the presidency? Because if that is true, then why did Bill Clinton take $500,000 from a Russian bank and he was directly thanked personally by Vladimir Putin, and his wife was running for president? So if the implication is that it benefited Donald Trump, there's the same implication that it benefited Hillary Clinton. So I'm just not sure what the point is here when it comes to someone who has a global enterprise, who is doing business in a foreign country with a leader who controls all of the business deals, including with people in his own country, of what exactly the end game is and what it has to do with Russian collusion, which the entire special counsel was supposed to be based upon.
When I read that report about them promising to give away, or potentially promising to give away, that $40 million penthouse,
yeah.
I laughed out loud in my office, because anyone who covered President Trump in business knows the Trump organization is actually cheap as hell. Sorry. I mean, they would not have given away anything that they didn't absolutely have to. To me, that sounds like, hey, guess what? Here's the price of doing business. You have to do this.
Yeah.
An idea that was floated. And, you know, whether or not they would have ever done it, to me, you would have to have them, or any other New York real estate developer who doesn't, none of them give away anything.
I want to go back to the president's critics on this, because I think this is one of the main reasons why this has bubbled up. Because now we have an idea of whether or not he's part of the Mueller investigation at the center. And now that's being said because we know a couple of the questions. What do you think?
It is trying to expand the net beyond what this investigation started at, which is, did the Trump campaign collude with the Russians to defeat Hillary Clinton? And now we're talking about potential business deals before he became president of the United States. And you'll hear critics say, oh, he's giving Putin special treatment now. Is special treatment sanctions and bombing Syria and doing deals with Europe to take economic activity away from Russia? If that's Vladimir Putin's friend, who's his enemy?
So there's a theme here, though, that I picked up on, and it is that reach back. It happened with Paul Manafort. It's happened with Michael Flynn, where you reach back, you see what people were doing before the campaign.
Can I make one
yes.
point there? Because Alan Dershowitz pointed out that the pleas and the charges and the indictments that have all come from the Mueller investigation have all happened after Robert Mueller became involved. These aren't necessarily indictments because of activity that took place during the campaign. They were procedural indictments, and that again, I think the president could be, as Dershowitz also pointed out, in political beef yogurt, but the legal side, there's still a lot to be learned, and people would be
political
forced to rush to
matters
judgment.
because we're looking at 2020 already, so that's all that matters. All right, we'll move on. We're awaiting a court hearing as attorneys for former FBI Director James Comey are seeking to dismiss a House subpoena to have him talk behind closed doors. Lawmakers want answers on the DOJ's actions and run-up to the 2016 election. Comey doesn't like the format, but House Republicans say it's way past time for them to hear from him. Stay with us.
We need to know what Jim Comey was doing with regard to the initiation of the so-called Trump-Russia collusion investigation.
I'd like to take a moment to address my fellow veterans, because I know so many of you have served our country honorably. One of the benefits that we as a country give you.
Argentina, we saw the class photo a moment ago. Will we see movement now on China with trade? Will that move the markets, or are we getting ready for a long haul? Charles Payne, host of Making Money. Charles Payne, 2 o'clock Eastern Time, Fox Business Network. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
What do you think? Is there movement or not?
There's the niceties are pretty good going into the meeting, right? It's not just the comments that Lighthizer made. By the way, he made it to Liz Claman, so Fox News was the one that kind of broke that this morning. Fox Business, rather. But there's also a piece, a good editorial in the China Daily, which is the sort of unofficial, official mouthpiece of the Chinese government, suggesting that they do want a deal. They just would like America to meet them halfway. So we're getting everyone saying the right things as we head into this. So we'll see. The market is cautiously optimistic, I think. But because it is President Trump, someone who really does back up his words, they know all of the things that he's saying he would do are not idle threats.
How do you think the White House has played this?
I think they've played it well. The only thing I would have done differently is I probably would have done some sort of primetime talk at the very beginning of it and said, listen, this is what we're doing, this is what we're trying to achieve.
To the American people.
To the American public. And then, maybe a follow-up after China deliberately targeted our farmers to say, listen, you know what, obviously there could be a certain amount of pain. By the same token, though, I'm fighting for Main Street, not Wall Street here. So as you hear Wall Street chime in and continue to talk about consumer prices, know that they're talking about their bottom lines, because ultimately Americans do know one thing. You have to have a job before you can care about how much something costs. And I think that's what he's fighting for here.
As far as the optics of that signing ceremony this morning, and the president tweeting this just a short time ago, just signed one of the most important and largest trade deals in U.S. and world history. The U.S., Mexico, and Canada worked so well together in crafting this great document. Terrible NAFTA deal will soon be gone. The USMCA will be fantastic for all. How will, and by the way, did you see this as a good thing, and did we get a good deal?
I think we got a good deal. There are a lot of things that brought it into the 21st century. Some of the digital stuff wasn't even covered in NAFTA. So I think the American workers and North American workers got a good deal, and it was something the president promised. Also, we should also know that. Remember how acrimonious this whole thing was. The Canadian representative, she came out every hour with donuts and, for the press, but the harsh words for the Americans. And a lot of people did not think that deal was going to happen, and they pulled it out. And so it's just a negotiating style perhaps the world's not used to. It's not statescraft as we're accustomed to. But I think another thing we haven't been accustomed to in this country are results. So people said don't mess with NAFTA, it can never be done. It was done.
Trudeau had this to say: we need to keep working to remove the tariffs on steel and aluminum between our two countries. And he called the president Donald. So now they're all back on a first-name basis, the gentlemen that they are. Is that the next wrinkle in this, Charles?
I think it is. I'm inclined to agree that we should take them off of Mexico and Canada. Keep them on China, I think. And I would also disagree, the implications that in your prior segment, Juan, General Motors is not a proxy for me with tariffs. General Motors is a proxy for an individual company that made a lot of business mistakes, that their market share and all the great categories keeps going down. The volume of cars they keep selling keeps going down. That they just misjudged their clientele who wants a lot of SUVs. But that being said, we've got the momentum right now. We want to keep the momentum. By the same token, you don't fight these kind of battles unless you can extract the very best deal possible, because this is the last time we get a bite at this apple with respect to China.
We got to leave it there. Right now, markets are down just a small fraction, 20 or so points. Will the markets be watching this G20 summit?
It's like it's rubbernecking it all day long. Nothing else will matter. It's like it's like driving down the highway. Like, why did traffic stop?
Interesting.
A big 18-wheeler with a bunch of milk cartons all over the place.
I think they call it sun delays where I come from.
Really?
We just hit you right in the windshield.
Yeah.
Thank you, Charles.
All right, guys.
Nice
See you later.
to see you. Well, the standoff between Russia and Ukraine intensifying. Ukraine now calling for help from NATO. And President Trump canceling talks with Putin over the clash. How will this all eventually be resolved?
In the meantime, you got a big new push on the Hill to prevent a government shutdown. Watch that story. Can Republicans hammer out a deal on the border wall? House Majority Whip Steve Scalise is our headliner. He joins us in a moment live, coming up right here.
Growing tensions in Ukraine, where Russian men are now banned from entering the country amid fears of a Russian invasion. Ukraine imposing martial law earlier this week after Russia seized 3 of its ships off the coast of Crimea. Trey Yangst is live in our Mideast Bureau with the latest on this. Trey?
Sandra, as the rhetoric heats up between Russia and Ukraine following that firefight over the weekend off the coast of Crimea, the Ukrainian government is now banning all Russian men ages 16 to 60 from entering the country. Today, reports do indicate that the main focus for this ban will be on the 1,200-mile land border between Russia and eastern Ukraine, although the new restriction does apply to all ports of entry. Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko tweeted today that the ban is being put into place to prevent the Russians from forming private armies within Ukraine. In 2014, Russian-backed separatists in eastern Ukraine used a similar tactic to fight the Ukrainian army. Now, the Ukrainian government also this week stopping all flights from Ukraine to Russia. A spokesperson for the Russian Foreign Ministry indicated Friday that Moscow has no plans to retaliate with similar travel restrictions for Ukrainian citizens. Late last night, a prominent Russian lawmaker said on television that Russia is not interested in war with Ukraine, although both countries do appear to be preparing for a major military confrontation. Now, Sandra, these latest developments do come as 24 Ukrainian sailors do remain held in Russia after they were captured on Sunday. And the latest information that we are getting is 3 of those sailors, all of them captains, have been transferred from a jail in Crimea to a jail just outside of Moscow pending trial. Sandra?
Trey Yangst in Jerusalem for us. Thank you.
Back here at home, Republicans floating a new plan to pay for a border wall. Democrats still holding the line at current spending levels, raising the chance now of a government shutdown. Let's go to our headliner today. We are pleased to have back with us House Majority Whip Steve Scalise. And, sir, good morning to you, and thank you for coming back here.
Morning, Bill and Sandra. Great to be with you.
So what we understand, $5 billion, give or take, maybe not over a year's time, but over 2 years. Is that something that could pass?
What President Trump has talked about is that he needs $5 billion right now to secure the border. And it's a full border security package, including building the wall, including technology, making sure that our Border Patrol agents have the tools they need. You just saw in the last few days, they're being attacked and assaulted by some of the people in this caravan. And the president needs to secure the border. I think it's important for all Americans that we get this done.
Senator Chuck Schumer making his thoughts on this very clear on the Senate floor yesterday. Listen.
He hasn't even spent the $1.3 billion Congress allocated last year in the fiscal year 2018 budget for border security, fences, drones, technology. This isn't actually about border security. This is the president trying to manufacture a shutdown to fire up his base.
Can you respond to that for us, Congressman?
Well, Chuck Schumer's still burned from the last time he shut the government down, and it didn't work for him then. It's not going to work for him now because people know. They see this threat at the border. Look at this caravan. There are already more than 600 known convicted criminals in the caravan. They just arrested another MS-13 gang member 2 days ago as part of this caravan, and President Trump has said, I need the money to fully secure the border. Sure, the first $1.5 billion is out there being spent. That's only a small portion of what it takes to secure the entire American border. So if Chuck Schumer wants to take the position that he's willing to shut the government down because he doesn't want to secure America's border, people see what's happening right now. They know what's at stake, and he'll lose that shutdown like he lost the last shutdown. Hopefully it doesn't happen. We don't want a shutdown. We want to make sure we can secure America's border. President Trump's laid out a very concrete plan that makes a lot of sense to get this done. Let's go and see a bipartisan agreement to secure America's border, especially at a time when we see the assault coming from known criminals. And keep this in mind. Every single day, on average, our Department of Homeland Security stops 10 known terrorists from entering this country. Every single day. We need to secure the border. President Trump has laid out a plan to do it. If Chuck Schumer doesn't want that to happen, if he wants to shut the government down over whether or not to secure the border,
on the potential
that's
of
a failed
that, Congressman,
position.
do you think there will be a government shutdown?
You know, the negotiations are ongoing. We still have a few more days to get this done. I hope we do get it done. But at the end of the day, we need to secure America's border, and we're going to keep battling until we finally get the agreement to make that happen.
Two more topics to get to quickly. James Comey's fighting back, and apparently some of your Republican lawmakers, they want to get James Comey in before them one more time. And you're running up against the calendar here because you're going to toss the gavel over the first week of January. James Comey said this in a tweet. He said, today my legal team filed court papers to get transparency from House Republicans. Let the American people watch. Bob Goodlatte, chairman of the committee, was with us last hour and said the following as to whether or not the Comey testimony will happen. Watch.
We're open to the idea of videotaping it. The fact of the matter is, though, he is trying to run the clock on us.
Trying to run the clock, sir?
I agree with Chairman Goodlatte. Look, we've laid out a number of different options for Comey to come in. You don't get to decide whether or not you want to comply with a compelling order to come and testify before Congress. Ironically, in his tweet, he mentions transparency. The whole idea of getting him to come and testify is to be transparent with the American people, not through leaks, which Comey's good at, but by being sworn in under oath and testifying and telling the truth to the American people about what's going on. Is this a witch hunt? Is this targeted? What's really happening? The only way to get true transparency is not through him trying to leak stuff and write books. It's about swearing him in under oath and getting an honest conversation about getting the facts to the American people.
Congressman Scalise, finally, the president is at this G20 summit at the moment. We don't know yet what all will come out of this. We know he's got a meeting with President Xi, but we do not know if this meeting with Vladimir Putin will be happening. The latest from the White House, the president has called this off. Would you like to see the president meet with Putin?
Well, regardless of whether he meets with him or not, clearly there is a lot of diplomacy going on because what Russia is trying to do with our friends in the Ukraine is wrong, and we're standing up against it. I'm glad that President Trump is standing up to Russia and standing with our friends in the Ukraine. We didn't see that from the previous administration. I'm glad we're seeing it now, and let's bring more of the weight of other countries in the world against what Russia's aggression is doing. It has to stop. Let's back the Ukrainians, and I think the president's going to do that whether he meets in person or whether Secretary Pompeo and others are going to make this more effective at the UN and bring more countries to bear.
Nice to see you, sir. Thank you for your time. Steve Scalise.
Great being back with you.
Thank you, Congressman. So the escalating crisis in Ukraine looming over this G20 summit, putting new strains on President Trump's relations with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Is the Russian leader testing the president's resolve? Our A-team will be back for that.
Also, there were headlines from Facebook could be doing major damage control. A bombshell report says that Sheryl Sandberg, one of the leading executives, went looking for dirt on George Soros. Why would the social media giant target him? We're looking for answers next, coming up right here after this.
President Trump's efforts to improve relations with Russia being put to the test after the seizure of 3 Ukrainian ships and their crews. The incident casting a shadow over the G20. The A team is back. Juan Williams, Ed Henry, and Shelby Holliday. So the president is being put to the test here. What do you think is going to come of this challenge, Ed?
I think that it's kind of a do-over for him after Helsinki. He took a lot of flack from folks in his own party, not just Democrats, that he should have stood up stronger to Putin. I think Putin since then has acted even more recklessly on the world stage with what's happening in Ukraine. And I think given what's happened in the Russia investigation as well, it wasn't a coincidence that right after the Michael Cohen development, I mean, the White House may say it's unrelated, but come on, the timing, within minutes, the White House is announcing from Air Force One, never mind that meeting with Putin not happening. And now Putin, as we said earlier, is in a defensive posture, which is not usual for Putin. He's begging for this meeting. So the president has an opportunity to give him that meeting, briefer maybe than it was going to be before. Maybe it's a hallway conversation, but stick a finger in his chest.
Sarah
and say
Sanders
enough is
came
enough.
out with this statement. We were talking about this 30 minutes ago. Here's her statement. She said the Russian witch hunt hoax, which is hopefully now nearing an end, is doing very well. Unfortunately, it probably does undermine our relationship with Russia. However, the reason for our council meeting is Ukraine. Hopefully that will be resolved soon so that productive conversations can begin, end quote. It probably does undermine our relationship with Russia.
It likely does, and as Ed pointed out, it seemed to have an impact on President Trump's meeting with Vladimir Putin. But what else has an impact on our relationship with Russia is the fact that Michael Cohen testified to Congress and told lies that Russia knew were lies. And this document that he wrote that was public, it was very clear if you were involved in the deal, if you were involved in President Vladimir Putin's press operation over there, that Michael Cohen wasn't being truthful. And so things like that also go into this balancing game between Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump. And Ed was talking about leverage. Leverage is everything when you're talking about Vladimir Putin. That is how this man rolls. That is what his currency is.
He got a lot of it.
He loves having the upper hand.
So what's curious to me is the world stage. Clearly, the president thought that he could, in fact, create an alliance between the U.S. and Russia, that he could do much better with Putin than previous leaders had done. But what Putin has done in Syria, Putin's continued relationship with Iran, the kind of difficulty that we face about the Khashoggi murder perpetrated by MSB or Bin Laden, MBS, all of that has Russia involved. And the question is, at what point does Trump say to Putin, this has to stop? He has yet to say it.
And he still has leverage. We still have sanctions in place against Russia. We still have a lot of leverage and still have a lot of ability to tell Russia no.
All right, we will have more on that coming up, but we've got to get to this topic. Facebook, we've been seeing them doing a little bit of a damage control. Now there's this report out that Sheryl Sandberg, one of the executives there, went looking for dirt on George Soros, and now Facebook has responded to that bombshell report, saying this: Mr. Soros is a prominent investor, and we looked into his investments and trading activity related to Facebook. That research was already underway when Sheryl sent an email asking if Mr. Soros had shorted Facebook stock. Sheryl never directed research on freedom from Facebook, but as she said before, she takes full responsibility for any activity that happened on her watch. What do you make of all that?
I don't know all the details. None of us do. But what it tells me, how the mighty have fallen. I remember not too distant past where Facebook was this behemoth that was going to maybe
Still
Sheryl
is.
It still is, but a positive behemoth, I guess. And the idea was that maybe Mark Zuckerberg will run for president. Maybe Sheryl Sandberg will be president someday. Lean in, and the book, and the bestseller, and transparency. And you find out there wasn't a whole lot of transparency about what was going on in terms of how they handled election ads in 2016. There was that big New York Times piece before this a couple weeks back talking about them digging up dirt on rivals and whatnot. Look, do companies do that? Sure. I'm not stupid about that. But let me just say, my point is that Facebook was supposed to be the next new thing that was a positive force in this country. And I think they're digging out of a lot of bad pressure right now.
Quickly.
For a while, it was a positive force, but I do think that they're under a lot of pressure. And this Sheryl Sandberg, it doesn't show any signs of ending anytime soon.
Well, I tell you, there's been a lot of talk about whether or not she stays. And remember, the head of communications at Facebook is now gone after this because he hired a firm that was involved with this. And there's a lot of anti-Semitism attached to the attack on Soros, and that could really damage Facebook.
Juan, thanks. Ed, thanks. Shelby, thanks. You guys have a great weekend.
you.
Okay, right on.
Thanks.
Epic, Ed, by the way.
Epic. That's the word of the day.
Always is. Hotel hacking, one of the biggest change in the world, announcing a major data breach today. 500 million affected. What to know, how to know if your data has been compromised. Coming up.
Data breach. Marriott Hotels has announced its Starwood program database has been hacked and potentially 500 million guests are at risk. Hillary Vaughn is live in Los Angeles on this story for us. Hillary, what can you tell us?
Hey, Sandra. Well, Marriott says the breach affects guests that made reservations at a Starwood brand hotel on or before September 10th of this year, dating as far back to 2014. Marriott says an outsider got their hands on guest information that was tied to the reservation. Starwood and Marriott merged under the Marriott brand, but the breach affects just the Starwood hotel chain. The group represents many popular hotel brands, including the Westin, Sheraton, W Hotels, St. Regis, and Aloft Properties. Marriott released this statement from its CEO apologizing for failing to protect about 500 million guests' private information, saying, quote, "We fell short of what our guests deserve and what we expect of ourselves. We're doing everything we can to support our guests and using lessons learned to be better moving forward." Marriott says hackers got access to personal information attached to the reservation, so names, mailing addresses, emails, and phone numbers, but even more private information like passport numbers, your stay preferences in your Starwood profile, arrival and departure information, even financial information like credit card numbers and expiration dates that were encrypted in the system. Marriott says they still don't know how someone got into their database. They haven't ruled out if it was an inside job or what type of attack it was if someone accidentally gave these hackers access. Sandra?
All right, Hillary Vaughn on this data breach. Potentially a lot of people affected by that. Thank you.
We expect to see the president is meeting with the Japanese prime minister in Argentina. When that happens, we'll bring it to you. Expect that next hour, in fact. In the meantime, he has arrived, and the G20 agenda is large. Will the U.S. strike a deal with China? Will Vladimir Putin and President Trump get together? The latest on that summit out of Argentina coming up momentarily here, top of the hour on America's Newsroom.